Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this seminar from the Transport and Health Integrated Research Network on Monday, the 23rd of October, 2023. We're very lucky today to have three speakers with us to talk us through some of the issues around public transport and climate change resilience, which is quite a topical thing today about weather and how public transport is going to be able to adapt going forward, given some of the issues that Scotland is currently experiencing. But today we've got quite a bit of a focus on Wales as a case study with some of the things that are happening here. Yes, we're going to have three speakers, each speaking for about 10 to 15 minutes. And after each one, we're going to have a 5 minutes worth of questions. So you can just reflect on what each of them have said. And then hopefully we should have a bit of time for a bit more open discussion towards the end of the session. So I know that some of you aren't already members of the Transport and Health Integrated Research Network. And we are a collaborative project between the psychology department at Aberystwyth University and Public Health Wales. And we've been going for about a year and a half now. And we welcome new members all the time. It's completely free. And I will put a link in the chat towards the end if you do want to join. And the idea is that we're bringing together practitioners, policymakers, and academics who work across different aspects of transport and health, so they can be a bit more joined up thinking across all these different areas. And we will work across four key themes, including active travel, air pollution, noise pollution impacts from vehicles, how communities can be severed by the presence of vehicles and traffic, and trying to reduce vehicle collisions and injuries. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Emma Ferrenti from the University of Birmingham, to give us a bit of the background and start us off on our journey today. So thank you very much, Emma.
Thanks, Amy. I'm just going to love a cat. I'm just going to try and share my screen. So I think you should be able to see a PowerPoint, and I just need to put it from the beginning slide. Are we all good? Yeah. Amy, can you keep an eye on time? Because I've just added 3 more slides.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's a little bit longer than I was thinking of doing on Friday. So thank you very much for coming along tonight. Today, my name's Emma Ferrenti. I work at the University of Birmingham, and I am in the School of Engineering, but my training is as a geographer. And so one of my roles within the School of Engineering is to try and bring the natural environment and climate science into engineering projects. So when I present about climate change, I love using some of the graphics that are prepared by Climate Action Tracker. They're regularly updated, and they're free to use. And I think that they really focus the mind on the challenge that faces us. So this is the CAT thermometer. And what this shows is increasing global temperature as compared to pre-industrial average. So pre-industrial average is 0 on the thermometer, and then everything above that is the amount of warming that we have created as a consequence of climate change. And you can see that in 2022, we were about 1.2 degrees warmer than pre-industrial average. And the Paris Agreement aimed to reduce climate change to no more than 1.5 degrees. So you can see how close we are to that 1.5 degrees already. And 1.5 degrees was chosen as like a target because beyond that, we start to see really dangerous impacts from a changing climate. The rest of the information on this slide shows you where we are likely to land in when you're thinking about the policies and targets that we have. So if you look at all the policies and actions that we currently have, we are still heading for 2.7 degrees worth of warming. So almost twice what is considered safe by the Paris Agreement. If you look at the 2030 targets, we're still 2.4 degrees above pre-industrial averages. And even the most optimistic scenarios still have us exceeding the Paris Agreement goal. And so another way of representing this information is to look at it in terms of emissions through time. And if you look at this graph here, it shows you from 1990 to 2030. And you can see the scale of emissions reductions that is required to be compatible with the 1.5 degrees Paris goal. It's just a huge drop and a huge change in business as usual as we know it. And so what these images tell me is, number one, that we have to mitigate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because we're already exceeding 1.5 degrees, even on optimistic scenarios. But also the pragmatist in me tells me that we have to adapt, because we are going to have a different climate in the future, and we're already starting to feel that different climate now. And the other thing, when you're thinking about adaptation, it's important to be thinking about these, what were in the past sort of considered high-end scenarios, which seem to be becoming increasingly realistic now. So we need to be thinking about at least 3 degrees, I think, when undertaking climate adaptation planning. This slide is from the state of the UK climate in 2019. I've checked the Met Office webpage to see if they have a similar nice graphic from 2022, but they don't. But you can read the State of the Climate in 2022 report. And I've included this now because I just wanted us to think about all the different things that are associated with the changing climate, because often it's the most newsworthy things like the flooding, heavy rainfall events, extreme temperatures, but a changing climate brings all sorts of different impacts and changes to our natural environment. So things like changing the growing season of plants, increasing the number of named storms, fewer snowy events, but then at the same time, we still will get cold weather. Last year we had, well, it's this year actually, in March, I think we had 30 minutes of snow in Birmingham, and it gridlocked my neighbourhood. I couldn't leave my house, and I missed a train to London, and so I wasn't able to present about extreme weather, the irony, which was not lost on me. And also things like changing sunshine hours. So although a lot of the focus is on heavy rainfall and extreme temperatures, there's a whole sort of different set of impacts associated with the changing climate. So just to narrow down on what the Met Office headline is with regards to changing climate, the strapline is always that we have a greater chance of warmer, wetter winters and hotter, drier summers. And so what that means is more frequent heavy rainfall events with more rainfall falling in a shorter period of time. Summers like 2018 happening every other year by 2050. So for me, 2018 has sort of been blown away by 2022, which was just incredible. But if you remember back to 2018, what we experienced in Birmingham was just a lovely long period of mild, dry weather, which was just really nice to live in, but at the same time was really unusual, at least from my experience of living in the UK, and my grass turned yellow. And so we will be having those sort of summers every year by 2050. And then it's also really important to think about sea level rise, especially if you're dealing with coastal infrastructure. And the one point I wanted to have on this, another point I wanted to make about this slide is that we can influence the future. If you look at the graph here for 2050, you can see that those 2018 summers are happening every other year, so approximately 50% by 2050. But if you look at 2090, look at the difference between the low emissions and the high emissions scenario. We can influence the future. You know, hope is not lost. If we mitigate, we really can reduce the harmful impacts of climate change. So just thinking for our urban areas. So I wanted to include a couple of things from the climate change risk assessment that was released in 2021. Two of the big things that are picked out from there are increased future flood risk. And so that is from fluvial flooding, from coastal flooding, and from pluvial flooding, which is something we experience quite a lot in Birmingham. We don't have a big river, but if we have a very heavy rainfall event, the city floods very quickly because the surface water drainage systems are unable to cope with the magnitude of water that falls in that short period of time. There's been a lot of advancement in terms of understanding flood risk. The other major challenge for the future is overheating risk. And I think the risk from this is that there's been sort of less preventative action being taken place so far. So both of these challenges face us, flooding because it's something of such a huge magnitude, overheating risk because if it is of a huge magnitude, but also because there's been less adaptation effort around it. Just to think about flooding for a moment or two, one of the things that I do, I also run a network and charity called, I shouldn't probably plug it, but I'm going to, called the Trees and Design Action Group, TDAG. And we hold seminars online, and we try and produce evidence-based information about what green infrastructure can do to make our cities more resilient to future climate change, along with other topics too. And so I wanted to talk about the importance of green space for a moment. I love the diagram in the top. I wonder if it's your left or my right. The natural ground cover diagram in the top corner. This shows you that if you have rain falling on a vegetated surface with trees, 40% of that water never reaches the ground, 10%, 50% is absorbed into the ground, and you only have 10% runoff. It's just incredible. If you compare that with 75 to 100% impervious surfaces, which is probably characteristic of our most built up inner urban areas, then you have 55% runoff. And if we have rainfall increasing, if we have more rainfall falling in a short period of time, then it is very difficult for grey surface water drainage systems to deal with that. And it's the importance of having large green spaces to soak up the water and trees to help slow the flow into the drains cannot be underestimated. Despite this, green spaces declined and impermeable surfaces have increased. And so I'm hoping that now we have biodiversity net gain. That's a real opportunity for trying to increase the amount of green space we have on developments. This is a graphic from First Steps in Urban Water, which is a new guide that we have produced recently at TDAG. So that's the Trees and Design Action Group seminar network. TDAG network, and we're having a seminar on the 15th of November talking about this guide and having other speakers talking about managing water as a resource. And whereas the last slide focused very much on the end of sort of like the flooding system within our urban areas, this takes a step back and thinks about all the different changes through time which have led to more water entering our channels, that water reaching our cities more quickly, and then that water being dealt with as a problem, something we need to try and get away from our urban areas or from our fields as quickly as possible, all which have exacerbated the risk of flooding in urban areas. So if you look at graphic A, that shows you water as a problem. Graphic B shows you water managed more as a resource and thinking about slowing the flow and how we can reduce flood risk, not just within our urban areas, but from throughout the catchment, from the source to the sea. Both those diagrams are available on the guide, and you are free to reuse them as long as you keep the copyright TDAG sign on the bottom. Also in the guide, we try to focus on providing practical guidance, things that you can do right now, because small changes have a large effect. And so the writing in this blue table is too small to read. The purpose was not to strain your eyes this morning. The idea was to point you to this resource to show that if you're implementing water management interventions, here are some different ideas, different interventions, and tips on good delivery, good management, and links to effective case studies. So these First Steps guides are quite small. They're only 4 sides, and one side's a big picture, but they have lots of information and next steps and links through to other guides. Concerning overheating risk, overheating risk in our urban areas is a function of 3 things. It's a function of the outside temperature, the indoor temperature, and your personal vulnerability. And when you're thinking of designing urban areas, if you look at figure 1, but if you look at the left side, which is where all the red writing is, you can see how the urban form there is working to create a hotter urban landscape or an urban heat island effect. Because by having lots of tall buildings together, you are reducing the view of sky. And having an open view of sky is what helps our cities cool down at night. And so often when we have a series of high temperature days, our urban areas heat up and then they don't cool down at night. And then the next morning they are hotter. And that's how you get overheating risk increasing. And that is the fundamental part of the urban heat island effect, is that our cities get hotter because they have more stuff in them and they cannot cool down at night. And good urban design should try and create an increased view of sky. You should bring in green infrastructure for the cooling benefits it can provide. And it's just thinking about how you can get that air to mix and circulate and cool down. When we're thinking about overheating risk, you have the greatest risk of overheating in flats and energy efficient dwellings, which is interesting because it shows that you can't work on carbon mitigation and in isolation of carbon adaptation, because if you're trying to reduce your energy, you're making your building tighter and then you're increasing overheating risk if you're not careful. And also that it's the most vulnerable who are often disproportionately affected by overheating risk. Unfortunately, I think water affects everybody equally, but overheating risk tends to work with existing vulnerabilities too. So people with poor health, people who are unable to move to cool down, so perhaps because they're in care homes or in prisons. It's always the vulnerable who are disproportionately impacted by heat. Again, this is from the First Steps in Urban Heat Guide produced by TDAG. You can access the diagrams. You can find out specific things about what you can do to try and understand overheating risk in your town or urban area. Think about where your urban heat island is likely to be of greatest magnitude, and then try and use that to influence strategic planning and design. If you can choose not to develop in the urban heat island, then that's great. If you have to develop in the urban heat island, what can you do to make it a more sort of climate sensitive development? Figure 3 shows the complexity of understanding urban heat, all the different things that are happening. But basically, I think as long as you can try and design areas with a large view of sky with some green infrastructure, you will be reducing overheating risk. The important thing to mention on this slide is that trees only cool the natural environment when they have access to water. And so you need to be thinking about your water management as well as your overheating risk. So I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, Amy. Tell me if I'm running out.
Got about a minute.
A minute. Great. So I think the point of this slide is to say that urban areas and urban transport systems are only resilient when the surrounding neighborhood is resilient. This is 2 images from Rio de Janeiro in South America. And what you can see here is that these steps here are actually the exit from the metro station. The metro was running absolutely fine, no problem whatsoever, but people couldn't leave the metro station because the surrounding neighborhood was flooded. And so transport resilience is inherently part of urban resilience. At the University of Birmingham, we have developed an approach to map climate risk and vulnerability assessment within our urban areas. Something that we've developed in collaboration with the City Council. It's so that they are in charge of the layers and they can embed it within their processes. I'm hoping that the ScanMe works and my slides will be available afterwards. And what we did with the CRVA assessment is basically, we call it making a burger. You have all these different layers. You have fluvial flood risk, urban overheating risk, green space layers, and you add them all together, and that helps you understand how climate risk and vulnerability varies across the city. This is Birmingham, and you can see that the greatest risk areas are not particularly within the CBD, but much more broadly across the whole central part of the city. And because this is a vulnerability assessment, it also includes measures of vulnerability, including IMD, and indices of multiple deprivation and excess years life lost. This methodology is available for download, and we think that anybody should be able to repeat this in the UK, although you may need to slightly change your layers. So for example, I think Wales have their own version of the indices of multiple deprivation, but the method should be repeatable. And this map is compliant with Carbon Disclosure Project reporting. So if that is something that you want to do as an organisation, this is a map that you can produce and submit for that too, as well as using it to understand planning across your city. This is Birmingham and climate risk broken up in different ways to support different sorts of decisions. Last but not least, if transport resilience is your focus, then there is a policy guidance document that we produced it feels like a long time ago, but it was only a year ago, thinking about how you can write policy for transport resilience starting from scratch. And there's a lot more information there. So that is me. Thank you very much. And sorry if I went a little bit over time, Amy.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Emma. Has anyone got any questions for Emma specifically about her slides? And hopefully we can have a greater discussion later on. You can either raise your hand physically if you've got your screen on, or you can use the raise hand function at the bottom menu, or put your question in chat, and I'll try and keep an eye on all of those. Any thoughts for Emma? There's Lucy.
Hi, Emma. Yeah, I was just wondering towards the end of your slides, so there was some high risk areas of red showing across. They were kind of almost look like they might be linked with rivers or roads, or is it population density? So maybe you could explain that a little bit.
That's a really interesting question, Lucy. I wonder if I have the technical capacity to just quickly share that screen. Share from current slide. Amazing. So let's go back one. Can I go back one? I can go back one. So yes, they are linear, aren't they? The change in vulnerability. And so it follows the roads a little bit because air pollution follows the roads. It's often higher close to the roads, but also our roads follow our rivers. And so if you're located next to a river, then you are higher flood risk. And often I think the parts of our rivers were developed first within our cities. And so those are close to rivers are often, at least in Birmingham, seem to be associated with high levels of social deprivation. And so it seems like deprivation follows the rivers, which is interesting because it's not a causal relationship, but because you have the rivers, which is where the roads and the industry developed and the flood risk is, that's why you get this sort of linear feature, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can think of something similar in an area of Rhondda Cynon Taf in Wales, and Pontypridd is by a river and slightly high levels of deprivation and lots of flooding risk around there as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Emma. We've got a comment. I wanted to double check what you mean by green spaces such as trees absorb radiation. It might be a stupid question, sorry. I know these take on the greenhouse gases.
Okay. So trees are just awesome, aren't they? I think we should just put that out there now. It also gives me a minute to think through what you've just asked me. Trees are awesome. And I think so they do lots of different things. So one of the things they do is they can absorb greenhouse gases and they can sequester carbon. And so that can help us work towards our carbon mitigation goals or net zero or decarbonisation, however you want to describe reducing emissions. So trees have a really important role in taking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. On the scale of an urban area or on a city, if you add all the trees together, they do a little bit, but it's our woodlands where the biggest impact is being seen in terms of carbon mitigation. In terms of absorbing radiation, if you stand under a tree when the weather is hot, the tree absorbs that sunlight so you don't have to. And someone explained this effect to me in those terms, and I find it the most useful way of understanding why I feel cooler near a tree. You've got shade, and then you've also got the process by which the tree evapotranspiration, the process by which the tree turns the sun's energy into latent heat and then releases it back into the atmosphere, which is a lot more complicated, and I don't want to try and describe right now because I'll get myself in a big knot. Amy, you're very welcome, Amy.
That was a thank you there. Thank you so much. I think we're going to move on now. If anyone has any other questions, we can bring them back at the end. Thank you so much, Emma. So if we can now introduce Nerys Edmonds from Public Health Wales. Thank you, Nerys.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Emma, for starting off the seminar. Hi, I'm Nerys Edmonds from Public Health Wales. I work for the Wales Health Impact Assessment Support Unit. So I'm just going to get my slides up and then I can start. Just going to get that onto slideshow. Okay, hopefully, Amy, let me know if they're not sharing properly.
That's
but
perfect.
I think
that's perfect.
That's great. Thanks very much to Emma for starting us off, because I think it's set the scene well for what I'm going to talk about, which is a piece of work that we've recently published in July, which is a health impact assessment of climate change in Wales. So it's really been about thinking about all of those climate change effects and impacts that Emma was talking about, and how are they going to affect population health in Wales. And just to sort of set the scene from an organisational perspective, we are the National Public Health Organisation for Wales, and we've recently developed a new long-term strategy, and within that strategy, addressing the public health effects is one of our priorities. So I think we're seeing a kind of a growth in our work around climate change, which is really important. And I think the piece of work that we've looked at with regard to the health impacts of climate change has been really thinking about those vulnerable populations that Emma was talking about, and how will, given those effects of climate change, what does that mean for the population of Wales? And so what I'm going to talk about today is really some of those findings, but particularly the findings that have been around transport and the impacts of climate change on transport and how that might impact health and wellbeing. So just to sort of set another sort of scene setting slide really is, we very much recognise transport as a really important enabler of health and wellbeing, and also important in terms of tackling health inequalities. And the infographic on the right is from some work some colleagues in Public Health Wales did around community resilience, well, individual and community resilience in 2019, and highlighting the different aspects of resilience, including the physical capital, natural capital, financial capital, and human and social capital. And we very much see transport as a real important enabler of those different capitals that contribute to both individual and community resilience in terms of connecting people to their social relationships, their economic and educational opportunities. So that's why transport is important to us. So going on to think about the effects of climate change and those impacts that Emma was talking about, we know that our rural communities in Wales already face a lot of challenges accessing services due to, the geography, the travel times, and a lack of public transport. We also know that around 60% of our population in Wales live on the coast, and that our coastal areas and the transport infrastructure on the coast is very much at risk of damage and disruption due to flooding, storm, and sea level rise. About a third of adults in Wales have some kind of limiting long-standing illness, and this means that we have quite a large population with conditions that do make them more vulnerable to those climate change effects that Emma was talking about, such as overheating or in a flood situation. And also it means that those populations require greater access to health and social care, and that also has implications. So one of the products that we've produced as part of our health impact assessment is a series of infographics, and these are designed to sort of communicate some key messages. This one just highlights how different population groups in Wales are likely to be impacted by the different effects of climate change. So we can see that extreme weather and flooding has a negative impact, particularly around more vulnerable groups and around mental health and wellbeing, but also access to services. So I'm not going to talk through this one in detail, but it's really to highlight that that's something, if you want to know more about how different groups are going to be impacted in Wales, that is available from our website. So moving on to think about how the climate change impacts on transport may impact health. One of the first routes is really about access to essential services and the potential disruption. So in terms of health and social care, climate change is identified as a clear risk to the delivery and resilience of health and social care, both in the UK and Wales in the climate change risk assessment. And a number of studies have shown that disruption to transport infrastructure from things like flooding can delay emergency response vehicles. The other perspective is that we've got increasingly complex health and social care packages being delivered in people's homes. And this can then be disrupted, particularly if there's extreme weather, whether it's storms or flooding, because it's more reliant on people travelling out to people's homes to deliver that care. Now, it may be that more resilience could also be built in if there's staff in the local area. But we also need to consider both how our health and social care workers can access people in their homes, but also how informal carers, how their access to the people that they care for could be impacted. Another essential service is education, and I think I read in the newspaper yesterday that some of the schools in Scotland have been closed during this storm over the last week, and that's very much a risk that has also been highlighted in the climate change risk assessment, that there's likely to be disruption to education. One of the statistics that we pulled out in the health impact assessment was that we have over 100,000 pupils in Wales that get transported to school by bus, and obviously any disruption to the road network could impact on that access. And lastly, disruption to transport, whether it's from higher temperatures or extreme weather, obviously can affect supply chains of essential things like food and medicine, but also has negative impacts on economic output and productivity, which can also have knock-on health impacts. Another avenue in which climate change can impact health via transport is via the kind of conditions of travel on public transport. So this is the current National Adaptation Plan for Wales that was published in 2019. There is going to be a new National Adaptation Plan published next year, but this one that was published in 2019 highlighted a need that there needed to be more research done about the impact of overheating on public transport. And again, I've highlighted there that a number of groups are more vulnerable to heat-related illness. So that's an important element for our sort of future transport infrastructure, is how do we make sure that people don't overheat while they're on the trains or the buses. Another area we've identified within the health impact assessment is around working conditions for a number of different workforces are at higher risk of negative health impacts as a result of climate change. I've just highlighted here that there are identified heat risks to transportation workers, and there's quite a useful research project called the Heat Shield Project that produced this infographic around a number of different workforces. And overheating at work can impact on safety and accident rates. So that's another area that needs consideration in terms of responding and adapting to climate change. There is some evidence, but it isn't, I wouldn't say it's conclusive evidence, that warmer weather may encourage people to be outside more and again, I think this links to what Emma was saying, that there is quite often we focus on the extremes when we're talking about climate change, but what we know is that average temperatures will be rising as well. So our general climate will be warmer, as well as having periods of extreme weather. So the general warmer weather is thought to encourage people to be outside more and maybe more active, and that may encourage more people to use active travel. However, there is also evidence that obviously where we get the more extreme hot weather, that can have a negative impact on people being more active outside. So I think this is something that we're still kind of really trying to understand. How is this changing climate going to impact people's behaviours in terms of physical activity and active travel? Finally, there's really important, looking at the mitigation side that Emma talked about in terms of reducing emissions, there's really fundamental benefits to health and well-being from adapting our transport for lower greenhouse gas emissions and for more active travel, both in terms of improved air quality, but also keeping people more physically active. And there's a study I've quoted there that's done some really useful modelling about the impact on reducing mortality of those measures. So just to summarise really, the health impact assessment that we've carried out has looked at a whole range of aspects of health and well-being. So it's looked at mental health and well-being, food security, community resilience, education, flooding, a whole range of factors. Today I've just spoken about our chapter really that's looked at transport. But we know that the climate change impacts on transport will have another number of impacts on health and well-being, and that's why we're really keen to contribute to this discussion today. So thanks very much. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Nerys. I think Emma's made a comment herself in the chat about how some school children, if they can't go to schools in hot weather, they then might not be able to access shade in their own garden or shade in a local park, or they might not have something cooler at home. So that's an interesting assumption to make, isn't it? If it's too hot in the school, being at home will be better. Did you want to say any more about that, Emma?
I think I've spoken enough. I really enjoyed Nerys's presentation, and I was just thinking about changing. I was thinking about active transport. It's really important that if you're encouraging people to walk or to cycle, that you have that shade so that they can move around in hot weathers. Trees also provide shelter when it rains as well. It's much easier, but then leaves can be a dangerous hazard, and so it's about implementing green infrastructure, but also the management of it.
Absolutely. Something I noticed locally when we had the storm the other year, that the winds came from a different direction, as they then cut down a lot of the trees. And so in order for them not to crash onto the roads, so that's a pro safety, but then all of the shade and shelter that those would have provided before isn't there. So I do think there needs to be a wider discussion. We are going to be having another specific seminar following up on this one, just on active travel, and that will be in April. So do keep your eyes peeled for that. Is there any other specific questions about Nerys's slides? Otherwise, we'll move on to Alaka and come back at the end and general questions. Can't see anyone else. Great. Okay, over to you, Alaka Toogood from Transport for Wales.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my slides. Are you able to see that? Okay, I'm just going to go into presentation mode.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah. So hello everyone, thank you for taking some time out this morning to come to this session. I'm Alaka Toogood from Transport for Wales. My role is Climate Adaptation and Resilience Lead. Today I'm going to be talking to you about firstly why we're adapting to climate change, a bit about our current understanding of climate change risk, how we're assessing climate change risk, and then what we plan to do as an organisation to build a more resilient Transport for Wales. I just wanted to kind of give an introduction to what Transport for Wales is. It was set up in March 2020 and is a subsidiary body of the Welsh Government. The primary focus was to help the Welsh Government deliver a high quality, safe, integrated, affordable and accessible transport network that people of Wales are proud of. And we're really striving to deliver on this by enhancing our climate resilience across our network and across all of our operations as well. Just to talk a little bit about the infographic. So the map of Wales shows all the services that run across Wales. There is also rail and bus on the map as well, but I know you probably can't see it, so I'll make sure these slides are sent out after. But the reason why I wanted to just talk about the expanded infographic is the core Valley Lines is the rail network that is solely owned by Transport for Wales. So we are directly responsible for adapting these assets. The remit of Transport for Wales is growing, so we do have quite a lot of bus services across Wales now. And we also have some bus depots, so we've recently taken ownership of the Cardiff Interchange, which is just outside of Cardiff Central. Yeah, and then just to say we are a multimodal organisation that spans all across Wales. So what do we already know about climate change and the impact on the transport sector in Wales? So the stuff that I've got on the screen already is taken from the CCRA3 report. Some of the figures on there are quite shocking and will be very relevant because there's been a lot of impact to transport over the weekend, not so much in Wales, but more England and Scotland. So it's talking about the number of days per year over 26 degrees and kind of what impact that'll have to transport. a lot of it is kind of focused around flooding and how much the risk will increase as we kind of reach 2050 and 2100. So this is more kind of what we're doing about climate change and why we are adapting to climate change. So as we are a subsidiary body of the Welsh Government, we are not required to report underneath adaptation reporting power, which is something that is in place for a lot of organisations in England. So Network Rail, Transport for London will have to report under this. But instead in Wales, we have a remit from the Welsh Government. So it's on the screen here, but I'm just going to read it out because I think it's quite important. It's kind of like the overarching thing that we have started with our climate adaptation plan. So the remit was to ensure that all of Transport for Wales operations delivered on behalf of the Welsh ministers are designed and delivered based upon the latest data on climate change risks and impacts, and robust climate change adaptation plans are in place. So we have just published earlier this year our climate adaptation and resilience plan. It should be aligned to the remit. So the remit letter covers a 5-year period. Our climate adaptation plan then was informed by policies in Wales. So Nerys has talked a little bit about Prosperity for All, which is our national adaptation plan, and then just some other policies that feed into it. So the Environment Act Wales. We have also used the UK CP18 data to feed into our plan. Just kind of a quick reference to this really, but Transport for Wales will be a named body on the Future Generations Act, and we will have obligations to be delivered as part of this. I think for our climate adaptation plan, we really wanted to make it clear that climate adaptation, you would think, kind of focuses on a resilient Wales pillar, but just how much climate adaptation resilience kind of interlinks with all the other pillars. So just for example, really building resilience helps us to connect communities. By delivering climate adaptation, we were also really keen on identifying the wider socio-economic benefits. Kind of following quite nicely from Nerys's presentation, at Healthier Wales, we really appreciate how much active travel routes can influence this. And also kind of those other impacts such as improving air quality. So this is kind of what we've worked on already at Transport for Wales. So as part of our vulnerability assessment of the core lines, which is our owned assets, we have conducted an analysis of weather-related incidents which have adversely impacted the performance of the train services. The graph you can see on this screen, so this data is not fully up to date. So if you can see for 22-23, we've had the highest amount of incidents since Transport Wales has been in operation. You can notice there's quite a few different colours as well, so a different incident reason name, and that's because we're really trying to work on identifying what the different incidents are. So this is kind of an ongoing work, so we can really understand what our vulnerability is to the different incidents. We have created a dashboard with all the incident data on. It really helps our teams to understand where our most vulnerable areas are. We do also have 6 weather stations across the network. They really help us understand how the infrastructure reacts within extreme weather. Another thing that's really helpful with the weather stations is we can identify anomalies. So quite often we overlay them with kind of past weather events, and we can kind of understand what actually happened in the different locations, and just how the core lines are set up. We really notice the difference in weather patterns from, say, for example, Cardiff to some of the stations further up in the valleys. So just a bit now about how we are assessing vulnerability to climate change. So we are using the UK CP18 data set to understand our vulnerability to climate change. Following the Climate Change Committee's advice for good adaptation, which is prepare for 2 warming and assess the risk for 4 degrees, And we do appreciate that the UK CP18 doesn't directly align to this. So what we have decided to do is use the RCP6 and RCP 8.5, and this will depend on the lifespan of the asset. We have developed a climate change risk assessment framework, which is then supported by a tool to help people assess climate change risk. All of this then will feed into our GIS system, just so that we can have it's kind of an open access system for anyone internally to understand what risks we've identified already. So this is just a very quick example of one of the climate change risk assessments we've already done. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I think in the seminar in April, we're going to kind of do a bit more of a deep dive of the climate change risk assessments, do some sort of lessons learnt. But just some key things I wanted to pick up from here. So this is a dashboard that we've got to help us manage the climate change risks. So this one that we've already done at Mountain Ash, almost all of the elements of the system we identified increased from in the short, medium and long term. And one of the things that myself and the others in the climate change team are really working on at the moment is making sure that when we're doing these risk assessments is looking at them as a system. So it's not just the impact that weather has on our infrastructure, but kind of the wider effects and how that ripples out into the community. So yeah, we have created a number of these slides. So we talked to people about these, calling them interacting risks. So we have found it really helpful to have these kind of graphs. So if you think about the 4-degree warming scenario, it kind of makes people appreciate all over the organisation how climate change is likely going to impact them. And it kind of really brings up the idea that running our services is dependent on external factors such as energy, telecommunications and a robust supply chain. So this is our governance framework, and the reason why I want to talk about this because it's been really helpful for us to get buy-in, not just kind of working on climate adaptation, but how we can feed that to our board members and also to the Welsh Government if necessary. So delivery of climate adaptation really for us is dependent on the governance structure and also that strategic direction. Sorry, I'm running out of time. I've just got one more slide left now, but our climate adaptation and resilience steering group has been set up, and it kind of provides an oversight of reporting on climate change risk. We then have our climate adaptation working group, which is a group that I chair, and that's really about the management of the climate change risk assessments and how we kind of deliver on climate adaptation. This is just my last slide now, but I just wanted to go through some of these. So within our climate adaptation plan, we have got an action plan for climate resilience, and it kind of sets out the actions about how Transport for Wales is going to achieve a resilient organisation. At the moment, the plan is a live document, but we do plan to update the actions every 5 years. And there's a few of the actions on here already that are already in progress. And we have the working group set up, the impact assessments, and we finished the climate change projections and also the climate change assessment framework. And there was one thing that I wanted to highlight is the top one, which is conduct research into nature-based solutions. And I think it kind of links into quite nicely to what Emma was saying. And this is something that we're really keen on pushing throughout the organisation. So when we are looking at adaptation options, that nature-based solution are always considered. That is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm not too sure how we're doing for time, but
Brilliant. Thanks, Aleka. Yeah, you're perfectly on time. We've got 9 minutes left to have a general chat and field any questions. Anyone got any questions on any of those topics, really? You can put your hand up and put it in the chat. How did you work to identify the interacting risks? Was it via stakeholder workshops?
So for the interacting risk diagram, I think it was WSP have done quite a lot of work on this already. So we used that as kind of a base, and then yeah, just working with the different leads within the organisation really. So just speaking to people and understanding like what the kind of rippling of impacts were.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments, reflections?
I can I'll share the details for the interacting risk research because it's really, really useful.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we'll send around the slides to everybody. We usually like to link everything on our website as well. I did have a question kind of for all of you. So most people will be interacting with this kind of process by trying to get somewhere on a really hot day or a really wet day or a really cold or windy day, and they'll be standing at perhaps a non-existent bus stop, or the bus stop will be there, but the bus shelter won't be there. This is quite common in rural parts of Wales, where sometimes the bus stop is just something that you happen to know and there's no sign of it anyway. What would any of you recommend for maybe a member of the public who's kind of trying to still use public transport, want to give up their car, but actually they find that it's not that set up for people at the moment in terms of having really hot weather or really windy or snowy or something? Is there anything that they can do? Is there anything, information that they can give to their town councillors, their community councillors, in order to sort of help them know what to put in place? Because often people are told there's not enough money for this type of infrastructure. There might not even be enough money to manage the trees if you were to put them in. So these are all fabulous ideas, and I'm so grateful for you all sharing them. But I think I'm just trying to put myself in the position of some of the Jane or Joe blogs who might be their level of interacting with this sort of information. Yeah, have you got any thoughts?
I can say something about trees, but I think I've said enough today. So if anybody wants to go before me.
I go for it, Emma. Give them time to think.
Okay. So trees, managing trees is really difficult because so if you plant an urban tree, you probably need to water it for the next 5 to 10 years to keep it alive. You also need to make sure that you take care of its leaves so they don't block the drains, and also keep an eye on dead wood, because I think one of the fatalities in Scotland was unfortunately due to a fallen tree. So trees do represent a hazard in our urban areas. There are two ways that tend to happen when you plant a new tree now. The local authority often requests the maintenance care for that tree for the next 30 years of its life before it can be planted. So that makes trees super expensive. The other way that we seem to be getting around this in Birmingham is we have a really good, I don't know if this is a solution, but we have a really good, we have Birmingham Tree People, which is a charity that takes care of the city trees in Birmingham. So they are volunteers. We go out, we map them, we measure them, we record them, we plant them, and that way we can still continue to achieve the city's green infrastructure aspiration aims, even though, as you've probably seen, Birmingham is bankrupt.
Great, thanks, Emma.
I was just wondering, actually, when you just said that, so I saw on the news this morning that they've announced that Birmingham, well, not necessarily Birmingham, but the West Midlands, so across the whole combined authority, are going to get some money to improve the bus services. So I wonder if it's opportunities like that, when you look at the shelter that you require to use the bus services and the impacts to older people or people with health issues, that mean they require more shade. So yeah, I don't know if we're planning, okay, when you get a pot of funding like that for public transport, that are we really looking at climate risk within that and what we need to spend to mitigate risk as part of those kind of funding that might be available? I'm thinking it probably hasn't been considered at this point, but it'd be interesting to kind of find out if it could be considered, if it has been considered.
I can just jump in there because it kind of follows on quite nicely. So I don't think I guess I don't really know how much influence we have over like bus shelters at Transport for Wales, but we have just put a green roof on one of our head offices, and this is kind of a prototype with the ambition to kind of have that more widespread. And we do also have a sustainable impact checklist, which is happened right at the beginning of all the projects, and it kind of covers quite a lot of areas. So we'll kind of look at what all the sustainable impacts are, but it also looks at stuff like heritage and is there aspects where we can put in green infrastructure as well.
Great, thank you. Naris, did you want to chip in?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors related to what you said. I think we have a behavioural change team who are kind of experts in using behavioural approaches and applying that to different policy areas, and they're very much involved in the climate change agenda. And I think we will we're all adapting to a new climate, and that does involve changing some of our behaviours to help us stay safe and well. So, a classic one is, of course, in the UK, it's a hot day. We all tend to like head out in the sun and, actually we're going to have to, whereas, if you go to a hotter country, what you'll find is that most people are in the shade at midday, where, and I know that's a kind of real truism, but there is actually going to have to be adaptations the way we approach our climate to help us protect health and the health and well-being of more vulnerable people. So I think there's a kind of behavioural and information aspect to that. But the infrastructure that underpins that ability to be safe and well is also really important. So I think Emma's point about shading, I also think more availability of water in public areas is going to be really, really important, because if we want people to stay active in a different climate, and I suppose I'm talking particularly about heat right now, but we are going to need more shade. We're going to need more access to water. I had a really interesting conversation right at the beginning of the work that I was doing around climate change health impact assessment with somebody, and we were talking about, how many of our play areas at the moment have shading. Very few playgrounds have shading built in, and that's the kind of thing. So I think some of this, in terms of the kind of levers for change, I think some of it is through the planning infrastructure, planning policy, design guidelines, supplementary planning guidance that local authorities develop. We're going to have climate adaptation woven into that to make sure that where we're any investment in new active travel infrastructure or outdoor infrastructure generally, enables people to be active in different weathers safely. I think the other aspect, we've just actually published a short briefing paper about the use of health impact assessment on climate adaptation planning, because again, where changes are going to be made to our urban or built environment because of climate change, we need to make sure that considerations of health and well-being and equality are built into those. So, we could see, for example, obviously a lot more investment in flood defences, but we need to make sure those flood defences still enable people to be active, enable them to access green and blue infrastructure. So health impact assessment is a tool that can enable that consideration as well. So I think in terms of investment in public transport, I think that is a big strategic issue about how do we, particularly given the cuts that we're all aware of, which is a big concern given how reliant people are in terms of accessing services. So yeah, just a few thoughts. No quick wins, I'm afraid, there, but a few answers.
Brilliant, thank you, Naris. We are now perfectly on time at 11 o'clock. If anyone else has anything to say at the moment, I'll give you a last word, and I think we'll call an end. Are there any resources you can share on that health impact assessment on climate adaptation planning? Yeah, so I think what we'll do to answer that question, we'll anything that anyone's mentioned in today's chat, we'll send you a specific link, and Neris has shared it in the chat there for you as well. We'll send it in a follow-up email to everybody who signed up to today's event. I think that's it. I can't see any more burning questions from the chat. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, and thank you to everyone who came along on a Monday morning. And yes, we will put this recording up on YouTube. So for those who couldn't make it along today, please share far and wide, because as Nara said, there's quite a lot of ideas that we've come up with today in order to take this forward and think about how it can be, the adaptation can be just and support as many people as possible. Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And we will see you at the next Think seminar sometime soon. Thank you and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.